Hey, this is Evan Tauscher with jamplay.com. I'll give you a few minutes to join in here. Welcome to Classical Classics Volume 2. I'm really excited to be continuing this series with a whole nother 10 pieces. We're going to be looking at both some of the most developmental and important pieces in the classical repertoire and just sort of dissecting them, trying to figure out how to make some of the more difficult sections more doable and possible with our hands, and just trying to train ourselves to be able to do some of the things that the music's asking of us, as well as exploring some musical ideas and eliminating some of the misconceptions in each of these pieces. So I'm really excited to guide you through this. This week we are going through Adelita by Francisco Tárrega, the great Spanish composer. He wrote so much work for classical guitar, and so much of it is loved. You may have heard of Recuerdos de la Alhambra or Lágrima we did previously, or Capricho Árabe. The list goes on and on. All of these super famous pieces that I just mentioned are by Tárrega. Like I said, we're going through Adelita today, and if you have any questions, by the way, throughout this entire time, whether it's about, strings, the music, about really anything about classical guitar or this piece or something strange that I said, please go ahead and leave a comment wherever you are watching, and they will be sent to me at the end of this, and I will get to your questions, hopefully. Okay, so very excited to get started. Go ahead and grab your guitar. Now, since this is the beginning of this series, I'll mention this again, that if you don't have a classical guitar, don't feel like you're completely left out of this. You can definitely still do this. You can definitely still join in. That being said, if you have a steel string acoustic, that might work better than, say, an electric that you might have. However, if you're on an electric guitar, nothing wrong with that. You can totally do this. The advantage of a nylon string guitar is just going to be that you get the wider string spacing and that the guitar vibrates a little bit more, and you get more of this feeling that this music really calls for. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started with this music. If you take a look at the way this piece is formatted, you've got an A section and a B section. And both of these sections repeat, and after the end of the B section, or the second page in this case, it's going to loop back to the beginning and in that DCL fine, and that's going to go to the end of the A section again. So it's really A, B, A. It's very simple. It starts out in E minor, and then we move to E major. It's very clear. Like at the beginning you have, right? And then at the beginning of the B section, it starts out like this. So it's like the darkness and the light. You get those two huge contrasts. So yeah, it's really beautiful, and it's quite a simple piece to sort of not only wrap your head around, but also get your fingers moving. There are some difficult moments. We're going to talk about how to simplify those. There's some bar chords that aren't particularly easy, but you know what? If you're not there, we can definitely figure out ways to simplify that, and I'll discuss those as we go through. But you know what? We're going to just start with something that's really important with that piece, and that is the separation of melody and accompaniment. Now, you'll notice if you look at measure 1, it starts out with this slur, with those first two notes of the melody. We're going to play both of these E's on the 12th fret and the low E together, and we're to slur to that G sharp. Now, it's really important that we don't play this E extremely loud, because what happens is if we play that E super loud, the D sharp just disappears, and it sounds like all we played was this. So whenever we do slurs on the guitar, or pull-offs, or hammer-ons, whatever you want to call them, in whichever direction, right? These are descending slurs or pull-offs. You want to try to match, in some way, have like a similar plucked volume to the slurred volume. You don't want it to be the super loud note followed by an extremely quiet note. So you don't want to slam that first note, is my point. See if you can make them similar, like this. Now I will warn you that pinky to third finger slur is a somewhat difficult way to start out, right? If it was 2 to 1, it would be a lot easier because those two guys are way stronger, right? But try to train this 4 to 3 because that next note, the B on the 7th fret, that's going to be a hard place to get to after doing 2 to 1 here. But if you absolutely need to and these two fingers are giving you too hard of a time, you could start out by doing 2, 1, 1, right? But as far as that 4, 3 slur goes, which, you know what, I remember playing on electric guitar, those are always the difficult ones to train. These are typically going to be the weaker fingers. So if you start out your practice day and you're working on this piece throughout this week, try to start out your practice by doing some slurs somewhere in your warm-up routine, like especially the ones you're weak at, right? We're so guilty of playing the ones that we're awesome at, right? Yeah, 2-1 slurs. Those are always going to be the easy ones. Try starting out with the ones that are difficult for you, and then it makes the other ones feel so easy. Just something like this with a metronome, maybe. I'm just playing, you know, whatever frets, it doesn't matter, but I'm just building up a little bit of strength and consistency with these 4 to 3 slurs. One thing I'm making sure not to do here, you can tell, is not do this. Playing that first note super loud, right? I am trying to avoid that at all costs so that I can actually execute a nice sounding slur. Okay, so it might seem like I've spent a lot of time here on just the first 2 notes of the piece, but just take a look at the music. It's a lot of that, right? Almost every measure in that first half begins like that, with the exception of measure 4, right? So these slurs matter a lot, and it's a big separator of if you can hear the melody clearly or if you really understand how to play this piece, okay? So that's the first thing we're going to be careful of. And one other thing you might want to consider here, if you're familiar with classical techniques, is doing a rest stroke with your ring finger. I'm playing this, my thumb on the low E and my ring finger on the high E, and I'm doing a rest stroke, which, if you're unfamiliar, a rest stroke is when you pluck through the string like this, and you rest you rest your right hand finger on the next string down. So essentially, you're resting it, right? Like a rest stroke. You're going through stroking the string with a rest on the next string. So that gets the string moving in a really downwards motion, which actually gets the guitar vibrating a whole lot. Now you can mimic that sound with free stroke, which is when you don't rest on the next string, but it's not quite as warm and direct as this, right? This is rest stroke, this is free stroke. See, rest strokes, it's just got a little bit more of this clarity, deep, Spanishy sound to it. So it's something you might want to try if you haven't already. It's a nice way to get it singing immediately. By the way, rest stroke doesn't mean it needs to be loud. When I say clear and deep, I don't necessarily mean I'm punching the volume. Like I was saying, we want to make sure it still blends. It's just getting this different tone quality, this warm, very full sound. Okay, so we do this E to D sharp, and then we land on this B. Now you'll notice the B is a half note. We are not doing this, right? We're making sure that this B stays because that is the melody. The following note, the last beat of the measure, that E and G on the 9th and 8th fret, those notes are the accompaniment. You can imagine if this was on piano, it might go like, that would be in the left hand, do, da. Whereas in the right hand, it would go, or on the piano, it might sound more like this, right? This is the accompaniment, and it can be really quiet. And really, the quieter you control that accompaniment and the more you bring out that melody, the more it brings out the magic of the guitar, which is this polyphonic instrument that's capable of imitating other instruments really well. So yeah, if you make everything the same volume within the music, then it makes things boring and it doesn't really show depth to the music. So give that a try. So listen what I do here. See, I'm going to play that quietly so that when I get to the next spot, it's very obvious that this is the melody, right? Not. You see, if you play those accompaniment notes, the last beats of each of those two measures, then it sounds a little bit out of character when, you know, you have these two notes that just shoot out when you were playing this single note melody. So see, I'm imagining a piano when I'm playing this. Oh, wrong note there, but yes. And you know what? I'm going to encourage you to just play this with me, this low E to this other accompaniment note to this. And see if you can control yourself and not make one of them pop out like, like this, right? Maybe you could bring out the low E and the A's a little bit more, but then the other notes, make sure you keep it nice and quiet. And see, when I'm playing this, I can just hear the melody singing on top of this. You know, you can imagine a vocalist, and trust me, I'm not going to sing for you. That would be disappointing. Right? The other thing about this piece is it's a very slow tempo. It's really, it's all about this vocal quality. So keep that in mind. This is never going to be, have a totally different feel. It wouldn't sound like the same piece. So we didn't really talk about the notes of this next measure. We're just going to take our pinky down 2 frets to this D, to the 10th fret here, and we're going to play A in the bass. Now, one thing I'm doing when I play that A in the bass is I'm moving my thumb back down to the E string. It's not super necessary, but in the classical guitar world and in a lot of steel string world too, you don't want these basses overlapping each other, because listen how this sounds if they do overlap. It sounds like this. You hear this fourth? That's kind of uninvited. There's not a lot of clarity to that. It's a really muddy thing. So when I move to this next measure, you see my thumb immediately shoot back to this E string, the 6th string, so that it's really nicely muted, so that this A is really the highlighted element of the phrase. Right? So once again, see, it's just the A you hear here. Listen if I let the E ring. It creates just a little bit of mud. You may not be able to hear it much, especially over a stream like this, but it's definitely there. See if you can practice doing that, because maybe later in other pieces, it's really necessary to mute quickly. So yeah, it's definitely a skill to develop. Right, okay, anyways, let's move on. We're doing a pull-off from this D to the C here. Again, don't slam it. Not like that, just... And spend some time, you know, if the accompaniment and the bass notes are throwing you off, try just doing... Just try that a few times. I mean, it can really help you develop the idea of what you're trying to do. And now, what do you think? Should that first one be louder or the second one? Like measure 1 or measure 2? Let's see. Maybe you can think about it too. I think measure 2 should be a little quieter. It sort of sounds like a like an echo or like a sad response. And then finally you have... And we'll get to that part now. So, measure 3, right? We've got the 8th fret in the 7th fret. 8th fret on the 1st string and 7th fret. We've got that C against the B. A lot of tension, right? He really wants to be resolved to the other B, which happens, right? Okay, so this is the first part where a bar chord is going to be used, although you don't necessarily have to. If it's really difficult for you to get that stretch plus the bar, I totally understand. You can always do 3 to 2 here. If you're able to do a bar chord though, I actually think it makes it way easier. It's just if you've developed that ability to a bar chord, if that stretch is possible for you. See, if I use 3-2, it makes it really hard. But what I was doing was 3-2-3, and then for the next chord, I'm putting my 3rd and 4th finger down there on the 8th fret. With the, it doesn't need to be a bar; it could just be 1, 3, 4 here. But I would recommend against that. If you can possibly get that bar, go ahead and do that. We're barring the 7th fret. My 2nd finger up here is going on the 8th fret of the 1st string. So it's like this. Then my 2nd finger quickly moves down to that D sharp, which is the 8th fret of the G string. And then, oops, so it's, then the next thing that happens here is our 3rd finger comes down on the 8th fret. And we still have that D sharp with our 2nd finger. And then our 3rd finger comes down on that G on the 8th fret of the 2nd string. So it's, keep on letting go of that D sharp, yeah. And then a big resolution here. Now, not written in the score is a little trill there, a little mordant. That sounds like this. I'll show you in context. Which is pretty characteristic of this piece. But I wanted to leave it out just in case that's another 3 to 4 slur here that's pretty difficult. So don't feel obligated to do it. This is how it sounds without it. Perfectly fine, right? But with it, it's... it just adds a little something, right? And again, that's just 3-4-3. At the same time as that low E, or maybe split the E right before. That's another thing you can try in your warm-up routine. Maybe after you do all of the 4-3 slurs like we were talking about in the beginning, you can try doing ones that are go 3 to 4 hammer-ons. And then when you're done with those, you can try little ornaments like this. And try to get them consistent on different strings. You might notice it's easy to do one like, but then can you do it over and over again? The exact same way? It requires a certain relaxation, right? Try breathing. It's actually easier for me to do this while talking than it is while actually focusing on it because I'm having to breathe and I'm a little distracted from the difficult task at hand, right? So it's actually here. And actually just practicing it for a few minutes there, I feel better about it. So, okay, we do this. And take your time here. A little bit of vibrato is kind of nice too on that accompaniment note at the end of the 3rd measure. Now, you'll notice that's a glissando, a slide from that B up to the E. Right, so we're doing, by the way, after this little ornament, or whether or not you choose to do it, I'm moving my 3rd finger down to the E here. Now, you could use the open string. Use all these open strings for the E and the B again and the E. But I just think it loses some of that really melodic flavor to it. It starts more sound like obnoxious guitar-y sounding. So that's something I really look out for in this piece. In fact, this is a piece that's used in a lot of youth competitions. A lot of folks play this really, really well. But one of the things that's done too often is open strings are used just based on convenience. You know, it might be easier to use open strings here, but it loses that Spanish sound. Let's hear it with the open strings if I did. It sounds a little bit robotic and just, you know, we all know those open strings, the guitar, that sound so well. So now let's listen to it the way that it's written here in the tab, as well as the sheet music. And you know, we're just outlining a minor chord here, you know? So we're using B, our second finger on the B, the 4th fret of the 3rd string, then our 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the 2nd string, our 1st finger on this G. So after that, that 3rd finger glides down to that E, then a glissando, and make sure you can hear it. This is what I do. Right when I reach the note, that E, I pluck again. So that's, you gotta be really clear about that, because you don't wanna, first off, you don't wanna pluck on the way up. It would sound like this. You know, I mean, that has definitely a certain flavor to it, but it's not the right flavor. The other thing you don't wanna do is reach the top and wait too long before plucking, because then it's, and now the moment's already gone, right? It doesn't feel like the slide reached anywhere. It sort of feels like it got stuck, and then all of a sudden you're restarting again. So let's listen how this should sound. See, I'm playing right as I reach the note up there. And notice I'm actually splitting. We call it splitting when we don't play absolutely literal, you know what I'm trying to say, in a linear way. So a lot of times we do that at the top of a gliss because it accentuates the note that you're reaching a little bit more. So, okay, and then now, guess what? We're back in the first measure. So if you made it this far with all those little details, you're doing really well. Don't get too discouraged, by the way. None of these pieces we're doing are something that you're supposed to master right away. You know, this definitely takes time, and maybe you can use this video as a little reference, you know, as you're working on it and everything. And I know on jamplay.com, that's where they'll have it permanently available. At least I think permanently available for members. So definitely check that out. I've got all sorts of different tips on these different subjects of technique in my full Jamplay course, by the way. So it's worth checking that stuff out if you're new to the classical technique and all of this is foreign, or if you're just trying to polish up some of your technique. I'd be happy to help you out there. Okay, so yeah, we finished this gliss, and we're back at the beginning again. And then that's the part where it changes, right? And we have an ending to that first section instead of the measure 4 little ornament thing. So what do we feel when we have this exact copy and paste almost of the beginning? All right, well, same thing at the beginning. Do we play it exactly the same? You know what it reminds me of? If you play it exactly the same, it sort of sounds like a little toy soldier marching or something, where instead of like a really emotional, human, romantic piece, right? And whenever we repeat something, this is a common theme you'll see across different pieces I teach, because there's always repetition involved in music, and this is a really important subject. Even popular music you hear on the radio, there's going to be repetition, and usually there's changes. And in popular music, it might be the words that change, right? So you have different verses of a song, and then something always comes back exactly the same, like a chorus. But in classical music, when you have this repeat, it's very similar to all those other things I've discussed. It's also very similar to conversation. When someone repeats themselves with something, it's always in a different way than before. If you're angry or you're frustrated, it might be louder or it might be quicker. Or say you're on the phone and the person didn't hear you correctly, you might enunciate more and be very, very clear so that they understand you. or it might be for memorable reasons, or it could be for a sad reason, like you have a sad memory and you keep on repeating to yourself something about it that's very sad or tragic. And more of the sad, tragic things are what's to relate to here. You're definitely not going to repeat it exactly the same way. So think about that when you decide how to play the second section. And it doesn't have to be what I say, it can be what you dream up there. So let's experiment with a couple of things. What if the second time through I'm playing louder and more impassioned, right? I felt something there. I've never done it like that before, so So that's more of like, I would say, that's the really dramatic interpretation of it, but that's more of like a desperate cry, right, for help or something, or just the final, maybe that'd be really good for the very ending, not sure, but I sort of liked it there. What I typically do here is I get a little bit quieter, because it's like a little bit of an echo. You can see how those two different ways are very, very different from each other. They both bring out totally different emotions. And that's where in classical music, and of course all the music that you likely play, that you get the strong sense of interpretation. It's not just reading the notes that have been played for hundreds of years off of a page, but it's about putting in your own personal musical choices that may relate to your life. Who knows, or could relate to your mood at the moment. But that's where interpretation has such an awesome quality to it. So I hope you'll explore that. But let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so we are just leading up to measure 8 there, right after the... Oh, not measure 8. Yeah, measure 8. Okay, so after this... Now, so far, that's all the same up to measure 3, the end of measure 3. But then we slide down, and we have this simple E minor chord, which is just the 5th fret, 4th fret, and 5th fret on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd strings. Now, you might just say, hey, Evan, that's just the open strings, right? And you would be correct. That is just the open strings, but the quality that it has when you move from here... By the way, well, let me finish that thought. The quality that it has here is really nice because you're moving from similar strings to similar strings, right? It's like almost like a glissando here. And it keeps that warm quality. Listen to the difference if I do this. Or very different sound. Of course, maybe it fits your interpretation, who knows? But for me here, this sounds really nice. Or doesn't necessarily have to be a rolled chord. Now, the fingering is important here. I'm doing a bar chord here and then 2 and 3. Keep in mind, you don't really need a bar chord. You could just do this if bar chords are particularly difficult for you. This fingering is important because that 3rd finger is going to be my guide finger. It's called a guide finger because when we slide down or up, wherever we are, that finger is going to stay on that string. I'm not switching to a new string. And anytime you do that, it adds a new layer of difficulty. So I'm making sure to finger it like this so that I've got a guide finger to lead me down to this E at the 5th fret of the 2nd string. Okay. The other fingers they're not guiding because we're coming from a bar chord, or 2nd finger has to move to the next string down. But just the fact that we have one finger as a guide finger really helps us find the right spot and locate where we're supposed to be here on that final E minor chord. Okay, now talking about repeats, we've got another repeat here. Now this is repeating the entire section, not just the opening melody like we saw at measure 5 compared to measure 1. But we have to think again, what are we going to do differently this time? Are we going to start it stronger than before? Maybe we started it at a nice mezzo piano, a medium quiet. Maybe we started it like this. Maybe this time we'll start it right after this. A little bit louder and more confident. Or maybe we start it exactly the same, but we do a different dynamic, we have a different dynamic goal. Maybe we'll get louder and louder and louder. So we'll end the phrase. Starting quiet. Getting louder. I like that. You know, there's a lot of different ideas you can have there, but at the end of the day, people just want to hear that beautiful melody again, so let them hear it without the mistakes, right? I joke because a lot of times, you know, the second time through, you got rid of all the nerves and you've sort of figured it out. You sort of let go, right? Okay, so at measure 9, we have a total change. We were just in darkness, maybe bringing up tragedy in our mind and trying to emote that into the music. Well, at measure 9, we have a total change. It is just flowery happiness, right? So we start out with this G sharp, key sign that we've changed keys right into E major by the very first notes. E and G sharp, I mean, that's outlining a E major chord if I've ever seen it. So we've got E and G sharp. A lot of times I like to play this in a much sweeter way, meaning more dolce, or sweet, meaning sweet, towards the fingerboard. If I play it back here, it sounds very metallic and not really heartfelt, right? So I'm actually going to start out on a bar chord just because I want to locate these notes in the bar chord afterwards, and I don't want to have to replace all my fingers. But like I said, if bar chords are foreign to you, we can always figure out another way around this. In this case, I don't want you to do this, because then, guess what? That G sharp gets dropped, and that's a dotted quarter note there. So I don't want you to jump like this. But something you could do is eliminate that B and play just two voices, the E and the G sharp. Because honestly, no one's going to notice if you skip this note, the B, right on the 3rd string. But you know what? If you can do it, then more power to you here. It's going to sound great. Okay, so we've got E and G sharp, and then we're going to find the 6th fret, 4th fret, and 5th fret on the 4th string, 3rd string, 2nd string. That's going to outline that G sharp, B, and E, right? Just more of an E major chord. Right there in root position, because you've got the E at the bottom, at least. Okay, so again, accompaniment quiet. This is the new accompaniment note, and it's even harder to keep quiet because it's 3 notes, right? Our instinct is to go. But that really defeats the sound of this piece. Nice and quiet, right? And then our pinky comes out to this B. It's a little bit of a stretch here, right? Still in an E major chord. Then our 3rd finger comes up 1 string for that next chord on that 3rd beat of that measure 9. And then our 2nd finger gets to stay at the same spot. So in the way we were talking about guide fingers before, it's almost a guide finger because that one stays put. So, you know what, by the way, in the music that you have, whether you have it printed out or it's up on your screen, there's all sorts of ways to notate on the music. Drawing notes to yourself is such an important thing, because if I didn't have notes to myself in my music, I would be so lost. It's just like anything else, right? Keeping a calendar or writing a grocery list. It's so important to have this in your music and making your own little cheat sheet. Don't feel like you know, you need to preserve the music here. Just write all over it like a madman, really. Okay. So 2nd finger stays the same, but that 3rd finger just moved up to the 6th fret of the 3rd string. So did there was pluck that F sharp at the 7th fret of that same string, the 2nd string. Remember, accompaniment, melody. Again. Okay, so we've got a literal copy and paste again, right, of the same measure. So we're gonna play it differently. To me, I feel strongly about this one. I love the sound of it building confidence there. So something like. Which leads. I messed that up a little bit, but. Right, so such a nice little arrival. And again, we've got this low E going to the A and back to the low E again. Measure 9, right, starts out with low E, and then at the 3rd beat, right, where that's, right, you've got A, and then back to the E. So I warn you again, once you play that A, you'll see me immediately going to stop the E. So that sounds like this. Instead of this. Oh, I actually instinctively stopped it there when I was trying to show you not stopping it. Okay, so like this. You see how it sort of just sounds like treading through mud or something? It's very muddy. You want to stop it if you can. So that might be something you can practice on its own too, if that's something particularly challenging. I know it was for me when I first started classical guitar, so don't worry if it is. It's something great to practice no matter what style you play. So now we've arrived to this E major chord that's finally going to move up to that high E for one of the most iconic moments in the piece, and also one of the most difficult moments in it. So remember, it's D sharp now because we've got 4 sharps in the key of E major. We're gonna play B here up to E, another glissando like we had in the minor section at measure 4 to 5. Again, I didn't write this little ornament, but that's what's there. We'll get to that in a second. Let me just finish playing that. We're barring here on the 9th fret, then barring on the 7th fret. And again, that's another ornament that we can put in. We're gonna avoid it for now, but if you'd like, you can etch in at the 9th where we have that bar, where it goes F sharp, E to G, or sorry, to D, C sharp, I'm sorry. You can etch in a little ornament, so right here. It is a D. I don't know why that's the actual chord. This is it with the suspension. Yeah, it's a D sharp going to an E is what the ornament is. And then it resolves to that C sharp. Again, so that's the 3 to 4 slur. So another hard thing to practice, but for right now it can just be this. Then this. So, all isolated down without all of the rolling of chords and the ornaments, it sounds like this. Which, that change is difficult, I'll tell you that. This is hard to practice. Again, it's... But it's beautiful, right? Let's talk about just a couple of ways to get this more immediately without all of those notes. Because I know for some of you out there, this might be an introduction to classical guitar, an introduction to bar chords, and that might be really difficult. So let's just talk about a couple of solutions there. That should be no problem, this spot, but then here, that might get a little bit hard. So something that you could do is just play the bottom note and the top note of that 3-voice chord. And instead of using your 3rd finger here, after you get up to that high E, just slide your pinky down and play with your 1st finger on that F sharp. See, and you could just play 4, 2 instead of a bar chord, right? Which would normally be like this. Right? Instead of that, it's just, which sounds great too. Listen. Then you move on to the next chord. Again, you could do it like that. Just, yeah, that's not bad at all. Same thing, 4 to 2. So it would be watered down a little bit. Ah, my fault. It is not too bad. You can always water these things down. There's a better way to finger that if you were to do it like this. It might be... There you go. So really quickly, I'll finish this slightly watered down version and then we'll get to the actual notes here. Once again, it would be like this. If you want to play it the slightly watered down way, you would do 4. I keep on playing the 6th string there. So you slide your pinky down to this D sharp, the 11th fret, and you play this F sharp on the 9th fret, and you play to the C sharp there, the 9th fret on the 1st string. And then you hop this 1st finger down to the 7th fret of the 6th string. You play C sharp to G, so C sharp to B there. Okay, so in total, then you would slide your 2nd finger down to the A and play the F sharp here on the 7th fret, and then your 1st finger on this D sharp on the 2nd string, then an open B, and you'd be back to where we were with the full version. Okay, so the full version, oh, not that. Would be with those chords. Now, a couple of things to point out if you are trying to do that, or when you try to do that, is that the shift is the hardest part here, right? This is not so bad, but it's getting to here. That's hard. Let's talk about how to execute that, because this is where you're gonna hear everyone in the piece go like this. And have this huge pause between this chord and this chord, right? You'll hear this, which breaks up the flow if it sounds like this staccato jumping. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, oops, wrong spot. We're gonna make sure right after we play that note, that is right at the end of measure 11, right after we play that C sharp, we're gonna get our 3rd and 2nd finger here lined up to play here, which is where the next chord happens. So keep that in mind. Look at where these two are on the fingerboard and imagine them being there when you're in this spot. Right, so I'm imagining these two having the same spacing, and I'm imagining them right here. It's easier on your own guitar when you're looking at. See? So I'm going to practice this a few times. I'm going to practice, because that's what's difficult to get. And I'm trying to make it seamless. Okay, so it's sounding pretty good. So I might add in the other notes, which is going to be the 6th string, 4th string, 3rd string, and 1st string. I'm playing that with thumb, index, middle, ring here, right? So again, that's what you're gonna shoot for, and it might take a little bit of time, so feel free to try that little watered down version at first. Then with trills, it's going to be, or with the ornaments, you see you have that little 3/4 slur. This one's a little bit tougher because you have to reach up to that 11th fret with your pinky. Okay, so after you move down to that B, you're going to play an A with your pinky here, then F sharp, you're all in position here. Pinky, index on that 10 to 7. Then you have this D sharp, a little triad. This D sharp on the 3rd string, 8th fret, and then you're going to use an open string to get you down to the bottom of the fretboard. What we're going to do here is you have a G sharp in the melody, you'll hear some people play it here. I like playing it here. So you can also try it up here and move to the B there. I think it gives a little bit more color, but to keep things simple, I'm going to play it right here on this G sharp and use the open B and E strings next. Now keep in mind, you're playing notes on the open strings that are higher up. It's really hard to make this melody pop. Maybe you can play that alone. This G sharp, B, oops, sorry. G sharp, B, E, F sharp, G sharp. Just really bring it out. Because one of the keys in making a melody really sing out is making sure that you can hear it first and that you really want it. You really want the melody to sing. So if you hear that when you do this and you have all those other notes in there, you'll not cover it up like I just did. So what you're gonna want to do is make sure everything else is quiet. Or playing this as a chord is even better so that those other two strings don't end up affecting the sound of the melody. So again, 1, 4, G sharp to B, and then I'm sliding up to that 13th fret. Oh, it's such a nice sound, G sharp. Then I'm gonna aim for this D sharp with my second finger. Really important that I move to my second finger there. Then to the second finger. That's why it's important, because you're moving to this chord where you set down a bar chord on the 8th fret, and that second finger just glides to be in the melody. If it's not your second finger, then you have to do this. Then it's gonna sound so jumpy, right? We don't want that. C4, 2, practice that little slide there, it'll help. Another little spot for an ornament if you want to add one, right, like that. 2 to 4. Okay, so this is the last little bit. Then this is a little bit tricky. You have this 4th string, A sharp, which you're already on, so that's no problem. By the way, there's a fermata here you can see in the score. That means we're just gonna, at will, move on. That's really, fermatas are typically for conductors. Whenever they cue the orchestra to come back in, they can do that. So you're your own conductor here, and you're just gonna let that ring, and then move A, B. It's a little tough, this shift. So just practice that, where you're catching these 2 open Bs, or sorry, 2 Bs, 1 is open. Then we're gonna move down here. This is a little tricky spot. So if you wanna water this down and play one of the notes, you know, you can totally do that. But I'll show you how I do this spot here. So I'm doing, again, I'm playing that in the bar. Actually, you could even, I was coming up with another idea. You could play this chord like this. Then you could use your second finger on that A sharp, that 8th fret. I like that actually, so let's see if I can do that. Ah, it's because it makes that slur harder, why I wouldn't do that. If you're not doing the slur, use your 3rd finger here instead of 2nd. Then, here we go, we're gonna play A and C sharp, right here. So A and C sharp, making sure to have your 1st finger on the A, because that's gonna slide to the G sharp, and you're gonna play an open B, so you can practice that. Like you could do. But if you can do the bar chord, it's a B dominant 7, B, F sharp, A, D sharp. And then E major, 2, 1, 0, 0, E, G sharp, B, E. Okay? And then you move back to the beginning, and I don't think I need to reiterate it anymore, but you do something differently, right? You're not gonna just say, oh, back to the beginning, let me access that same emotion I did before and make nothing new interesting for the audience. You're gonna wanna do something a little bit different, and you might wanna be a little bit more dramatic with the ending. You know, maybe you might play. Something like that. Maybe do a nice slow down, retardando, be really awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get to some questions. I forgot to remind you during the stream later, I think I did at the beginning, but I want to encourage you to leave some questions for me here. I'll be getting to them here in just a second. It can be anything about this piece, about a particular measure, about classical guitar. I'd love to help you out. Thanks so much for watching, and please join me in the future weeks because we're going to be going through all sorts of different styles and difficulty levels of pieces, so really excited for it. Okay, let's go ahead and get to some questions. Okay, let's go ahead and get to some of these questions here. While I wait for them to send those over, definitely tune in these upcoming weeks. It's going to be awesome. If this piece was out of your range, maybe next week's may not be. So, okay, P. Simone asks, can you please describe the difference between free strokes and rest strokes again? Absolutely. So, a free stroke, you can think that you're sort of free of the following strings or any of the strings on the guitar besides the one you're touching. Sort of the way to remember it. Free, you pluck through the string and you don't land on the following string. Whereas a rest stroke, you land on the following string or you rest on the following string. You can see in my right hand here, this is a rest stroke. You can really see me ending up on that next string down. And then in a free stroke, you can see that I clear that next string. Now, free stroke ends up being what we use most of the time because, especially in classical guitar, a lot of times you're playing one thing on one string and then something completely different on the next. So you can't always use rest stroke because obviously if you're touching the next string after every note, that one can't be sustaining. The main reason to change between the strokes is rest stroke has this really deep and full sound. You hear it a lot in like flamenco music and Spanish music, and it has more aggressive direct sound, whereas free stroke is a little bit less that way. That being said, a lot of modern technique encourages a free stroke, this is my belief at least, a free stroke that sounds very similar to a rest stroke. You press down into the guitar so the direction of the string doesn't sound thin like this. It sounds really deep and full, right? And I can achieve that with all the other fingers that I'm using as well. So that it doesn't end up being a big difference between this rest stroke and this free stroke. Right? Very small difference. But it's something that you should practice because rest stroke does have a certain quality to it. Very direct and powerful. Okay. Bishop Bautista, how many hours a day did you practice to get to your level? Oh, yeah, common question. I'm actually glad you asked about hours and not how many years, because the thing is that, you know, you can play for 20 years and make very little progress if you're not actually committed to making progress and not practicing all the time. That hardly needs to be said, but you hear sometimes that people have been playing only a few years and they sound like they've been playing an entire lifetime because, okay, maybe not that extreme, but maybe you hear someone's been playing for like, 3 years and you would guess that they've been playing since they were little. that happens quite often. And the reality is the number of hours matters just a little bit as well. It's about practicing smart. It's practicing about the right things. It's about constantly re-examining your habits. To answer your question specifically, when I first started classical guitar, I was playing an unhealthy amount, I would say, like between 5 and 9 to 10 hours a day. And I was very fortunate to have that time. And I was very fortunate not to get injured. I don't recommend people do that. And now I look back at those times and I think, wow, so much time was wasted. I was not practicing the right things. I was not doing healthy. I was not making healthy habits. I was just repeating the same phrase over and over and over again instead of trying to improve. So really, I encourage people who are really serious about guitar to not set a goal for some huge number of hours a day, but to just have goals every single day. So that goal might take you 30 minutes to accomplish, or that might take you 3 hours. Maybe one day you have the luxury of having 3 or 4 hours to practice guitar throughout the day. Maybe you can set more goals for that day. But you always want to be goal oriented, not number of hours. That's how you get injured. You get number of hours and you're not doing enough breaks. All of these things can be big problems. Okay, Taco Tuesday, nice username. I noticed you using a vibrato a lot during this piece. Do you have any tips for developing this technique? Yeah, so classical vibrato is a little bit different than electric vibrato, if you might be familiar. I definitely played electric guitar, and I started out doing this on classical, and that's quickly got to get wiped away, because when you do this vibrato like that, you hit the other strings. And a lot of times, even in this piece, there's moments where I'm using it and I've got to let the strings above and below ring. It's also, these nylon strings aren't as effective at moving this way, right? Like an electric guitar vibrato. So we use this vibrato. And actually the technique that I always recommend is one that was taught by a former professor of mine, but it's one where you practice first doing something really extreme, like with a metronome, like maybe 60 beats per minute, and going like this. So you maybe go like click, 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 and it's actually kind of painful for a second. It's uncomfortable at least. And then, so say this is the click, right? And I'm doing this. Then I try doubling that so that it's right, and really get the pitch moving. I mean, when you move this way, if you really pull the string that way, you'll hear the pitch changing. So then you try quadrupling it. So doing, instead of eighth notes, you're going to do 16th notes. So you started with click, 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 and then it's click, 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 and then it's so click, 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 and then you do 30-second notes. So it'd be click, 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 click. And you start to feel a rhythm to this. Now, why practice it with a metronome? Because when you use vibrato, you want it to somehow match the tempo of the piece that you're playing. You don't want to be playing this slower piece like we worked on today and have some really strange vibrato. For instance, you wouldn't want to do this. Right? It sounds more like it's a clown house or something than maybe with all the sorts of mirrors and the lights flashing. It sounds pretty scary. So yeah, you want to try to match something. Maybe in this situation, let's see what I'm doing. Yeah, it's the 16th note version of it. So it's 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a... And anyways, you want to practice that with every single finger. It takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes of practice every day, and you'll notice yourself getting a lot more comfortable moving the pieces, because vibrato just doesn't happen from you just guessing away at it and getting better. It's really hard for it to work that way and for you to naturally develop any decent sounding vibrato. So that's my favorite method. Okay. Bishop Bautista asks, what is the best advice you can give a guitarist for developing picado speed? Yeah, so it's similar to apoyando, picado, it's like more the flamenco term for it. Bursts, practicing bursts. So maybe you set your metronome to a really slow speed and you're doing, I've got two big recommendations. Bursts, you're gonna do maybe this, then you might just do a section of it fast, right? So that you're not trying to speed up an entire scale. You're not going like, and saying, okay, I've practiced it for a while, now let's speed it up a little bit more. Because what happens, you get more and more tense when you do that. So you want to increase little sections. So maybe in a C major scale, you would go, you know, or in that example, something like this. You burst little areas. The other big thing is dotted rhythms, or like a swung sort of sound. So if you're doing this, it'd be, and then you would do it the other way around, which would be, so the first and the second note are closer together. Okay, and yeah, I would practice it this way, and with a metronome, always don't move up the speed until it's easy for you at that current speed. See if that helps. All right, we're out of time for today. Definitely tune in next week if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask today, or that you might have in the future that come up throughout this week. I will see you next Tuesday. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.